This is the disclaimer for Wildlife Control Consultant and Pest Geek Podcast for the Living the Wildlife podcast. Always follow national, state, provincial, and local laws when using pesticides and/or other control methods to manage pests. Wildlife Control Consultant, LLC, Pest Geek Podcast, Living the Wildlife Podcast, Stephen M. Vantassel, or their or his affiliates are not responsible for followers' use of the information provided here. Hi everyone, Stephen Vantassel here, Wildlife Control Consultant, bringing you another episode of Living the Wildlife Podcast as part of the Pest Geek Podcast family. Hey, glad to have you along today. We really kind of had a dreary day here in Montana. We've been having quite kind of a wet spring to make up hopefully a little bit for a very dry winter. So if you don't, you may not care, but the reality is the Missouri River powers a lot of the United States, and the rain we get here ultimately goes downstream. So some of you in the more central, the Midwestern states, you need our water. So you want us to have water, and we certainly need water to make sure we don't burn up like we did several years ago. But hey, I digress. I'm really glad to have you on board. Just a few things I want to kind of highlight here. I would love to hear from you. So you can reach me at wildlifecontrolconsultant@gmail.com. That's wildlifecontrolconsultant@gmail.com. Give us your thoughts about the show, ideas for future shows, and if you have a product or service that you would like to tell the world about, by all means, drop me a line. And even if you don't have that product, if you would like me to spotlight a particular issue, let me know, and I'll try to reach out to some companies. As I had an earlier broadcast, it's sort of interesting how many companies out there are kind of shy. It's one of the strange things about the wildlife control industry is that guys complain about they're not making any money, and yet when you offer them opportunities to advertise themselves through a podcast, it doesn't cost them anything. They get shy. So I'm a little puzzled by that, but hey, it's the industry that I'm in. So in any event, that's just the way it is. But we hope you subscribe to the subscribe and engage with us at the Pest Geek Podcast on Facebook, and we'd love to have more interaction with you. Well, what are we going to talk about today? Well, I would like to talk today about that wonderful thing called contracts. And so contracts, yes, the thing we love to hate, and I hope you have one. I'm thinking that many people in the business now know they need to have one. When I started, a lot of guys did not have one. Everything was quote unquote a handshake and an understanding and blah, blah, blah. Well, that often works well and when you're dealing with maybe small communities where everyone kind of knows everyone. So there would be community shame when someone doesn't pay a bill, or perhaps you screwed up a job, whatever the case may be. So you didn't have to necessarily rely on contracts. However, as the industry has grown, or as your business has grown, you know that not everyone is necessarily, let's just say, honest. And you will get things like bounced checks, or slow payments, or the person violates what you told them to do. Let's say you told them not to touch your equipment, or you told them to leave doors unlocked, or whatever. There's a whole host of things that can happen, and you need to have a contract that protects yourself, and your client needs to have a contract to protect them as well. And so it's not just simply a one-way street with a contract. A contract ultimately, and again, I'm not a lawyer, so I don't want to have anyone have an idea that I am a lawyer. Stephen, let me be very clear about this. Stephen Vantassel is not a lawyer. But I've had to take some people to small claims court, and it's not pleasant in the sense it's a pain in the butt. It's taking time out of your day. But for speaking personally, I did not want a reputation in the community that I was going to let stuff go. And I know some of you, that's hard because your schedule is so booked up that you would actually cost you more money to go to small claims court. And so that's a separate issue. When I was in business, that was not my problem. I did not have necessarily, balls to the walls jobs every single day. So yeah, it was a pain to go downtown and try to find a place to park and go to the courthouse and that sort of thing. But sometimes, thankfully, just the mere threat of the suit settled the problem. I had one person that I ultimately, as I recall, at least one, there might have been two, but at least one where I actually had to go through the court and they didn't show up, so I automatically won. And a judgment was levied, and then you had to pay more, because now you have to pay for the sheriff to go out and summon them, and blah, blah, blah. And there would be another meeting. Well, before we had the next meeting, he paid me in cash before the second court date. So, because I think the second court date, there's like an arrest warrant or something, some sort of a court summons. It was much more serious, and he didn't want to go down there. But in any event, I digress. So let's talk about the importance of contracts. So if you don't have one, you need one. And, yeah, it can be a little expensive when you're starting off in your business and you don't have, a pile of cash. You're trying to get equipment. You're trying to get your traps. You're trying to maybe get a good ladder. You're trying to get your flashlights. And there's all this type of equipment that you're going to need to service your clients. And you're like, oh, a piece of paper, man, I got to pay a lawyer to have all this done. And the short answer is, yeah, you do need to have a contract that's been vetted by a lawyer, knowledgeable in business law, in your state, or if you deal with multiple states, in your service area. That's important. So the reason I want to emphasize that is I'm going to show you my old contract, and I give it away freely. It's both in my book, the Wildlife Removal Handbook, and I send it out to people who request it at no charge, because part of the reason for my wanting to do that originally is it markets myself, of course, but also that if we can standardize our contract across the nation, we develop a stronger service contract for our industry. You may say, what am I talking about? The pest control industry has a lot more standardized contracts. Now understand that a lot of those contracts still have to be state nuanced, right? Because different states have different rules about what you can put in a contract. But those elements that are more nationalized, when you're all using the same template with some changes at your state level, so bear with me here, it's getting a little complicated, I know. But when everyone's using the same contract, if you get sued, if business A gets in a lawsuit, and that element of the contract gets upheld by the court, and that's one of those national items, that strengthens that contract nationwide, because courts rely on precedent and how other courts have judged things. And vice versa. If that particular element gets thrown out or gets tweaked, then you can revise that portion of the contract and then redistribute that across the country. And that will also strengthen and protect everyone else. So this is where we're kind of in this together. And this is, I just appeal back to an earlier podcast I gave about the importance of unifying our industry. We're not very good organizers per se. We not group people. Everyone's sort of an independent. They think they're the rugged mountain man out in Colorado going through the Rockies or whatever. So it's a problem, but it hurts us in terms of our business, because a contract is only as good or only as certain as if it holds up in a court of law. So in some cases, you don't want a contract being sued. You don't want to be sued over it because it's a pain. But on the flip side, you want a contract that's been beat up in the court to see what's going to stick. What is a judge? Because the law doesn't mean anything. Let me be blunt with you, okay? The law means nothing. The only thing that matters is what a judge thinks the law means. I know that's kind of harsh, and unfortunately, I wish we were a nation of laws, but unfortunately, we're not a nation of laws. So that's kind of the American mythology. We're not a nation of laws. And if you don't believe me, let me ask you a question. Is marijuana legal at the federal level? I'll let that pause for a moment. Well, you know the answer is no. So how is it all these people are smoking ganja in different states? Because states have legalized it. Well, how is that possible? We have a federal system. I thought marijuana was against the law. See, laws really don't matter. What matters is what's enforced. What matters is what a judge says it is. So I don't agree with that, by the way. I'm not suggesting that you just simply break the law because you know it's not being enforced. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying this is the reality that we're in right now, and this is why we want a contract that's more standardized across the country to the extent possible. Again, we have to make sure our contracts are written in a manner that makes sure it takes into the nuances of state law where you live. And there may be situations where there's local law. Okay, I'm not as familiar with that, obviously. There's a lot of localities in the United States. But we want a contract that can hold up. And certainly the pest control industry, just think of termite contracts. I mean, if there's ever been a part of pest control that's been litigated up the wazoo, termite contracts have been it. Okay. And so now, as the industry has matured, those termite contracts are, I would suspect, as solid as you can get in a court system where a judge decides what the truth is. Okay, so that's about as good as nothing certain. That's why you have insurance. That's why you're going to try to do things to the best of your knowledge. Okay, so let's talk a little bit more about contracts, what they do. What a contract ultimately has to do is explain what you're going to do and explain what the client is going to do, and that you're both in agreement that that's the terms of what your service is going to be. So you're going to do XYZ for client Smith. Client Smith promises to do XYZ for you for a certain amount of dollars. That's a contract in a nutshell. And the beauty of a contract, it doesn't have to be a negative thing. You know, sometimes we look at contract, it's really negative. And I understand that, but I want you to look at contracts as something positive, because the beauty of a contract is it helps clarify what people are going to do so you don't have misunderstandings. When you're dealing with things with a handshake and you don't have it written down, memories change. And by having it written down, you're able to work through making sure you both understand what is going on and what's not going on. What you promised and what you didn't promise. And that in itself, that process in itself will go a long way in reducing lawsuits. I don't have any statistics on this. I'm just kind of going on my gut here. My suspicion is, and I think if you think about it, this will probably ring true to you too, in your own work when you work with service companies. And that is, I believe that the majority, not all, the majority of lawsuits in service contracts over service agreements is because the person felt wronged. And because you either A, didn't explain what you were going to do properly, or you didn't fix the problem that you told them you were going to fix. I know of one situation, there was a lawsuit over a particular issue. Service was done. Animals were trapped inside of the building and started coming out into the living space. And rather than the service provider going out and trying to mitigate that situation, kind of blew the client off. Well, what do you think was going to happen with that? Here was a situation where, mistakes get made. I mean, none of us are perfect, right? It's not about throwing this PCO, WCO under the bus here. It's that, yeah, mistakes happen. I've made mistakes, okay? The issue is what do you do about your mistake? Most people are kind of generous if they know you're going to fix the problem. Let's say you're crawling in an attic and your foot goes through the ceiling. They get it. They understand. Yeah, they're not happy about it. Neither are you. You don't want to be having your foot go through the floor. Thank God you didn't fall through the ceiling, right? But it happens, right? People have put their foot through the ceiling. They're crawling, going through the attic and have put their foot through the ceiling. It happens. The clients don't just all of a sudden, I'm calling my lawyer, I'm suing you. No, what they want is they just want it fixed. And so if you blow off your client and don't fix it, well, guess what? You're probably going to get sued. Okay. So a contract can really go a long way, just to sort of really hammer this home. Even a bad contract, even if it's not written according to the law in terms of perfection, having something in writing can go a long way in just clarifying understandings, even if it has no legal force of law at all, because you violated various statutes within your state. Okay? Does that? I hope that kind of makes sense. So enough of that sort of intro. Now let me show you. Let me turn my screen on here. If I can do that. Oh, maybe it won't. Maybe it won't let me here. So let me do a pause. All right. Well, I'm back. So let's take a look at the contract that I send out. So this is a Word file. So it's a Word file, so it's easy for you to edit. And again, what does this contract do for you? It simply provides your lawyer or yourself. I would encourage you to go through this yourself, make changes. Maybe you know some things about your own area. Certainly you're going to put in your own business and address. Certainly change the dates. This is 1999. Well, obviously that tells you how old it is. So it's just a start. It's sort of a way for you to get going. You're not going to be violating my copyright. I don't prosecute this. You're free to use it and modify it to your needs. Understanding that, make sure an attorney reviews it, because I'm not standing behind it, right? So my point is that I'm making this available. When I was in business, I did have a lawyer do that, but we're talking well over 20 years ago. So, and that was in Massachusetts where this was created, and this was the one that I used when I was in business in wildlife removal service. So it at least helps you understand what elements I thought were important when I was doing the work that I did. Now, you may need to have multiple contracts. You may need to have contracts for exclusion. You may need to have contracts just for a trapping job. You may need to have contracts for your insect pest mitigation if you're doing that. Maybe you need to have a different contract when you're doing a cleanup. Let's say you're removing a raccoon toilet from someone's attic or something. So that is a conversation you need to have with your attorney as well as your insurance agent. Make sure your insurance agent, not a lawyer, or she's not a lawyer, but understand that your insurance agent may be able to see lingo that would make you more vulnerable from an insurance situation. Because in the end, an insurance company is kind of like an attorney on retainer. That's kind of what insurance actually is. It's more than that, but it gives you the ability that if you get sued, the insurance company has lawyers, and they have to decide, is it cheaper or better just to simply pay the fee or to fight it? And this is where your workmanship comes to play in your documentation. But you want to be sure that your insurance agent, you should have a good business insurance agent, someone who's knowledgeable in the pest control field. If you're in the pest control field, someone who's knowledgeable in the wildlife control field, or if you're doing both, make sure you have someone who is familiar with both areas, because a lot of similarities, but they're different. Okay, most people in pest control aren't using firearms. Okay, wherein people in wildlife control do use firearms. People in wildlife control don't use a lot of pesticides. They may use rodenticides and they may use a few fumigants, but there's not really anywhere near the plethora of pesticides used as in the pest control industry. So there are a lot of analogies, but they are distinctly different. And don't forget, you're going to need that auto insurance for business use as well. So make sure you get covered there. So here is my contract. I have it up here on the screen. I trust you all can see it here. So notice you get in the up here, as I'm going to highlight, you're going to have your business name, probably your logo, address, that sort of thing. And here we have the, like the preamble, what you're doing, when you're doing this, the day of the week, your business, XYZ, and the client, where they're located, because this, you need to have the address of where the work is done, because that gives you, in a sense, permission to be on their property. So you're not going to be in violation of trespassing, right? I mean, that's, trespassing tends not to be that serious of a crime here in the United States, but it can be, depending where you're at, right? And then we're going to talk about money, right? You want to get money right up front, talking about money, and then I have some lines down here where you can add additional information. Now, notice one of the things I had at this time, and I don't think a lot of wildlife control operators do this anymore, that's this section 4. I told the client when I was setting traps, I'm like, look, my traps disappear, you're paying for them. So I know some of you are in situations where the client can't seem to stop touching your traps. I would pull jobs when that happened. I'd be like, whoa. You handle my equipment, I'm done. Because there's a serious liability issue there. And it's hard enough doing wildlife control as it is without having your client, quote unquote, helping you. All right. So I wanted to make sure that was very clear to people. I had a job where I was managing an animal that the health department deemed to be removed, and we had an issue with workers letting animals out of the traps. And that was a problem. And the company had to really clamp down on their workers and say, the next person that does this is probably going to be fired. So that kind of settled that down a little bit. So you need to be thinking about that. Sometimes it's good to have a group of traps that kind of your throwaway traps. Maybe you bought them at tag sales or garage sales or something, or maybe they're traps that are really beat up and you're going to use them in sketchy areas. So if they get stolen, you're like, it could be worse, right? But you don't want your $80, $90 Comstock trap disappearing, right? I mean, that's some serious money. Or a Bailey or a Hancock, that's $250 when I was purchasing them, right? So then I would go down here. I at that time, not that I'm recommending this, at that time I was charging price per animal. Some people today are charging price per visit rather than per animal. And some people charge a flat rate for the job. Certainly, they all have advantages and disadvantages. I think if you're dealing with domicile damage, that is when animals are inside of a structure and you know exactly where they are, or maybe a den in the backyard, you know exactly where they are. A flat rate may be better for you in terms of you're getting all your money and you're done, and the client's not worried about you catching other animals. And you know you can finish the job quickly. If you're doing transient damage, I would definitely have either a per visit rate or a per animal rate. Otherwise, you might lose your shirt on that. Or you put a time limit on it. That's another way of doing it. I had here all checks that are returned. In other words, if someone bounces their check, there's a fee. Obviously, $20 is probably way too low by this time, okay? But just kind of gives you a little date. But you want to be thinking about that. What does it cost you if someone bounces a check, you deposit a check in your account, and it bounces like a ping pong ball? What fees are you charged? And, you have to find out in your state, what does your state allow as a reasonable hassle fee for dealing with that? Okay, and make it worth your while. So this is where you're gonna need that lawyer, or contact your state secretary, your secretary of state for your particular state, and find out what those fees can be. And then I had sort of a follow-up. Sometimes you're doing a job and you think you're done, and all of a sudden animals come back, maybe you missed one, or maybe you had a new invader. This was sort of a kind of my guarantee that I would come back and not recharge them the setup fee, and I would give them a certain amount of time. For those of you that are doing full exclusions after your job, this might be a calendar year or something. Maybe you're going to say, look, we're going to remove this family of animals. We're going to harden your house. Here's the price. We're guaranteeing our work, and you're going to have an idea of what that guarantee means. Okay, so you're going to have exclusions. If a roofer comes in and starts ripping off the roof, obviously the warranty must be voided. And then you can have a clause in there that says, if you have me come out and monitor the situation, then I can keep your warranty intact, but there may be a fee for me to visit, and I would expect there would be. Some wildlife control operators have been successful in getting annual renewals on their contract. They just come out and visit, check out the house, make sure it's still hardened enough, sort of like the termites, right? When I had termites at my house, I had to pay to have them controlled, and then I was paying over $100 a year, and a lot of times the pest control guy didn't even show up to quote unquote inspect. So I'm thinking, man, if you have 1,000 houses at $100 a year, that's some serious money, especially if you don't show up. So finally we had another swarm come up, and I had to call them up and say, hey, I got termites again, and they had to come out and take care of it. They probably would have caught it earlier maybe if they were visiting. Hard to say, but I had to call them, and they had to come out and reservice that, and it didn't cost me an additional dime because that was part of my warranty, right? So you have to decide, how you're going to do that, and there's been a lot of resistance among clients to do this, but I hope that this is something that can certainly take off over time so that you can have a returning revenue stream, because one of the challenges in wildlife control is we don't have a continuing revenue stream. All right, then I have in the area of recommendations, these are things that I think that should be done on the basis of the client, like cut away branches from the building, cover trash cans, remove bird feeder, cap chimneys. Now, this might be better put in your inspection form, and we'll have to have another presentation on your inspection form. But in this particular contract, I had some things here to highlight because maybe the person was hiring me right off the bat, and with the inspection was not really relevant. But you want to be sure that you tell the client things that they are obligated to do. So if you're doing a transient damage job and they're still having the bird feeder out there, they're going to be attracting animals, especially if they're complaining that, you're catching the entire neighborhood. Well, the entire neighborhood's showing up, right, to get food. So you're catching them along the way because you're putting in something better than what's in the bird feed, right? So this clearly is a problem. Now here we have, I need to change this. This is going to be XYZ. Now I get down here into, I have a section here on the owner is aware of side 2, because I had two sides to my contract. Okay, mutual obligations, and this is where we have the issue of the fees, that they're giving me access to checking the traps. And notice I have things in bold, capitalized letters here, unless specific arrangements have been made, I need to have access to those traps, which is why I really, as I got older in my business, I didn't like to put traps in attics. I know some of you like to do that, and there are occasions when it needs to be done. However, clients' memories are like sieves, and they don't care. So you want to be sure that you have access to traps, because you don't want to be in trouble with animal cruelty laws. Okay, so this can be a real issue. The animal rights people, and I know I've talked about that, are looking for a way to pierce the wildlife domestic animal legal veil, so that wildlife are treated the same way legally as domestic animals are, and that's a huge problem. So here we have additional things. I require the client to provide information to my company about what they see, what's happening on their ground. I'm not there all the time. Something new happens, they need to let me know. And this is an obligation on their part, right? They can't just say, well, we'll see if he recognizes it. No, they need to tell me what's going on. And then I provide what I need to do. Okay, I need to get rid of this as well. XYZ. XYZ's obligations. That's the company, your company. What are you obligated to do? Well, I put in there what we're obligated to do. Clean some of this up. That was a page number. And I would talk about the animal disposition. I would talk about my equipment. And then I would have the section on disclaimers. A lot of disclaimers. Notice I say here, now some of this may not have had any legal force of law, but what it does is it kind of puts people on notice. Putting a trap on a property can be an attractive nuisance. An animal caught in a trap can be attracted to somebody, and they may stick their fingers in because they think he's thirsty or they think he's hungry. This is an issue. People need to leave my equipment alone. And it's a problem. And then we have, as XYZ is in the business of handling problem animals, the owner understands and agrees that XYZ is not responsible for disclosing any damage that may have been caused by any animal, nor is XYZ liable for any damage caused by any animal, person, or nature. My point here is that I may have a kind of an idea of what that raccoon did in your attic, but I don't necessarily have a complete idea. How do I know what I can't see or what I didn't see? It's like going to a doctor and saying, hey, doc, tell me if I have cancer. How do you prove a negative? How do you prove everything's fine? You're going to tear out all the insulation and go, how are you going to inspect all the walls? What if the person had mice? How are you going to prove that that mouse didn't chew wires in that house somewhere? You don't know. So you have to have something in there that explains you can't see what you can't see. You can't know what you can't know. And that's sort of a bummer. Your client doesn't necessarily want to hear that. And perhaps you don't even want to say that. But the fact is, it's true. I mean, just look at any home inspection document, and there's all kinds of exclusions, right? All the things that they're not responsible for. So this is an issue. Plus, things can change. You can look at it on day 1. You don't catch the animal till day 3. Are you going back up into that attic to check if there's any new damage between day 1 and day 3? Probably not. Wasn't necessary. Okay, so make sure you have appropriate exclusions. And so these are some elements that are in my contract, and I would suspect as time has gone on, there would be probably a lot more things that would need to be changed on this, both in terms of wording and perhaps additional details would need to be in there based on the laws in your state. For example, when I was in business, we were not allowed to let clients check the traps for us. The law said my eyeballs had to view the trap. Oh yeah, it cost a fortune. I put 3,000 miles a month on my vehicle. You may say, oh, it's nothing. Yeah, but I was in an area of only a half a mile radius, basically, because I had to check traps every single day, personally. Unless I wired the traps open and left them open. So if you're in states, thankfully that law has been changed since. However, but you now need to put in the contract the client's obligation to call you or to notify you on a predetermined time scale so that you know whether to show up or not. And if they don't, that you will show up and charge them a fee for that. So this is something that you're going to have to make sure you think up. So this is going to take some time for you to work out, but at least it gives you a draft to start with, and you can then lay it out in any way that you want. And then ultimately, all of us together can be more secure in our contract and more thorough in our contract and have more standardized language in our contracts so that we help each other have standardized practices within our industry. Because, lawyers are looking for places to sue. And thankfully they haven't found our industry quite yet, but I'm sure that's probably changing. Certainly they found the pest control industry, to be sure, but of course you guys have been around a lot longer and have a much bigger businesses than those of us in the wildlife control field. But it's going to change. And there have been cases where people with wildlife control have been sued. And thankfully it's not common. However, you want to be sure that you avoid this to the extent reasonable. Unfortunately, there's nothing that you're going to be able to put in a contract that's going to make it ironclad that you will never be sued. It's simply not possible. Even when you do everything correctly, you may get a disgruntled client and you get sued. So as you grow in your business, you're going to understand there are going to be some clients you're going to be like, I think this client is probably looking to do bad things. Or perhaps they're so angry and so brittle that they're always looking for a fight. You may want to refer that client to your competition. Some jobs are not worth the money, even when you charge a lot for them. It's just too big of a risk because court cases can be very time consuming and it's not worth it in many cases. Doesn't mean you can be perfect, but you can avoid some of those big mistakes. You have to rely on your gut. I wish it was something I could give you, like, here are the rules. But clients that are just a little bit, they get squirrely on you. You want to make sure you check that out. I mean, so I hope that is going to be helpful for you. So here's the contract. You can contact me at wildlifecontrolconsultant@gmail.com. Just say, hey, Stephen, I heard the podcast on Pest Geek Podcast. You're living the wildlife. I'd love a copy of the contract, and I'll just send it along to you. It's just going to be a Word file, and you may do with it as you wish. Okay, I don't have any copyright on it. I do, but because I had it created, I'm not enforcing the copyright on it. Okay, hope it helps you. If it doesn't, make your own, but at least it gives you something to work with, and in a Word file where you can manipulate it the way you want to manipulate it. And that way, at least your lawyer is not charging you to come up with something from scratch. Okay. Certainly, if you're a member of various associations, you may be able to contact colleagues and ask them for their contracts, and sometimes they're willing to give it to you. But this is something we really need to have as an industry to sort of standardize our contracts to the extent that we can, and that will help all of us improve the quality of our service and to protect our businesses from bad things happening in the courtroom to the extent possible. All right, I hope that was helpful for you today. I'm Stephen Vantassel, Wildlife Control Consultant. Drop me a line, wildlifecontrolconsultant@gmail.com, wildlifecontrolconsultant@gmail.com. Would love to hear from you, criticisms, comments, suggestions for new shows. If you know of something you want to hear about, by all means, drop me a line. I'd love to hear your ideas. Because I want to make this show useful for you out in the field. And then also, if you have a product or service you'd like to sell, or perhaps you'd like to have a particular guest on to learn more about a particular product or service, let me know. I'd love to reach out to them. I'd try to get some interviews back online. And then ultimately, I hope that each of you understand that we want you to live the wildlife, not be the wildlife. Take care.